What's going on, guys? This is Rob. If you guys enjoy my content, make sure you hit the subscribe button and make sure you hit that little bell so you never miss out on my sexy voice. Okay, so we are getting into Infinity Wars Part 4. And again, this is kind of interesting. This is, issue number 4 is a little strange. It's more of like plot building, but it's kind of crazy because in truth, it feels a little bit rushed. What Gerry Duggan does here is he actually kind of takes a couple concepts from House of M. A lot of people know what House of M is, right? It's a story where Scarlet Witch warps reality and then creates a new one, and then, or really she eliminates the current reality, then creates a new one where like everybody's most subconscious dreams come true, essentially. But in this one, Gamora with the Infinity Stones had basically merged all these heroes together. So quote unquote, cut the universe's population in half by like merging people together and then threw them all in Soul World and then created like a whole universe within Soul World. And so it's kind of interesting because initially Duggan didn't really seem to explain that. Traditionally, Soul World is like its own world, right? It has like rivers and streams and mountains and so on and so forth, and it was always depicted a certain way. Then Marvel came back later and basically turned Soul World into the Marvel Cinematic Universe version of Soul World. And so what had kind of happened here is it was like Gamora had sent all these characters into Soul World and then built a house in Soul World and then put them all inside the house. So they don't really know what Soul World looks like. They're not really familiar with it. Instead, they're all just kind of residing in this universe she threw in there. Now, by merging them all together, Marvel gave us Infinity Warps. At the end of the day, it wasn't really meant to be taken seriously, and I may or may not cover it. I don't really know. I mean, I don't really care much about the characters in Infinity Warps, but one of the characters that was, or really a couple characters that were merged here were Wolverine and Emma Frost. And of course, we talked about that in the last video, that with Wolverine and Emma Frost being sort of merged together, it's Wolverine with Emma Frost telepathy. And initially, Loki was one of the characters who had been thrown into this universe when Gamora sort of changed everything. And so Loki was like the only person that truly knew what was going on. But in this instance, with Loki speaking directly with Wolverine, it's just kind of this thing where like Wolverine had scanned his mind. He basically read his mind to see what was going on. Not only that, one of the things that Gerry Duggan introduces here is something called Davondra. And Davondra is essentially this object or this concept that's created for the purpose of like consuming the occupants of Soul World. Now again, this is Gerry Duggan sort of making things up, or at least creating new things. Because remember, Soul World was a very peaceful place. Contrary to the way in which a person would arrive in Soul World, which is to say the Soul Stone would literally siphon off their soul until the whole thing was absorbed and then their soul resided in Soul World proper. In this, Davondra is kind of like this being that was either created by Gamora or has always existed. And we'll talk more about the role Davondra plays and with regards to the story here in a little bit. But like Davondra just kind of shows up, or at least one of the aspects of Davondra shows up. And of course, it's basically fought off by the combined efforts of Loki and Wolverine and Emma Frost brought together. And so what ends up happening is that sort of in the middle of all this, you end up having like Wolverine, who, Diamond Patch, who basically says, look, I'll send a thought to myself, or I'll remind myself of something, send a thought to myself to a version of myself in the future of this universe, which basically merges with the Phoenix Force. Now, this is not new. This is not Gerry Duggan sort of just grabbing it out of nowhere. This is actually going on in the Thor comic books, the Mighty Thor comic books, as a backup feature. But nonetheless, with this version appearing out of nowhere, it's just kind of like, hey, look, I could basically fix this for you, or at least, separate Wolverine and Emma Frost, and then just sort of go from there. Now, this is Gerry Duggan kind of playing it fast and loose with the Phoenix. The Phoenix's power has always been ambiguous. For those of you guys who are new to Marvel, the Phoenix's powers are really one of those things where it's just like whatever a writer wants the Phoenix Force to do is what the Phoenix Force can do. Its power is technically limitless. Like that's kind of something that's been established over the years. The other half of this is the Phoenix Force, or at least this future version of Wolverine with the Phoenix Force, also has the Power Stone. And so that's one of the things that's kind of hit on here. And that's where you sort of get a little bit of Secret Wars and a little bit of House of M brought in here. In the sense that in Secret Wars, you had an Infinity Gauntlet that was assembled because the Secret Wars event, the Battle World, basically dealt with like all these different universes sort of housed together. And so it was a different Infinity Stone from the various universes that were all brought together to create a unifying Infinity Gauntlet. In this instance, if a new universe is created, then a new set of Infinity Stones has to exist in that universe. Now remember, it didn't originally work that way. When it came to the Infinity Stones, back in the Thanos quest stories, Thanos had basically laid out the origin of the Infinity Stones. Like some being existed before all things and it was lonely, and then basically channeled its energy, or the fastest of its energy, into the Infinity Stones and dispersed them across the universe. And then that goes into the future stories of Marvel, where every universe has its own Infinity Gauntlet, and the Infinity Gauntlet will only work in that one universe. This changes that. What the entire basis behind Infinity Wars does is it changes it entirely and says, well, the Reality Stone will actually let you jump from one universe to the next, which technically is not supposed to happen. So again, it's Gerry Duggan sort of shifting things up. But with the Power Stone being used, this allows a user to, again, amplify their own power and manipulate the powers of others. And while it is kind of a stretch here. Jerry Dugan uses this to say that a person with the Power Stone can split those who are merged to split them apart. And so this is kind of borrowing from House of M, right? Like the House of M event basically established that like a new universe was created. Nobody remembered how things were supposed to be except for Wolverine. And then Wolverine basically woke up like, well, really alongside Layla Miller, woke up Emma Frost. Emma Frost started using her telepathy to wake up other people. And that led to, the House of M being changed back to the main Marvel universe in the Scholar, which took away all the mutants' powers, or at least 98% of the mutant population's powers. It really kind of invokes those things and brings them in. It's just one of those things where stories kind of build on each other in that capacity. Now, following this, with the Power Stone being given to Loki, Emma Frost takes it because she's kind of like, I don't trust you, man. And there's no reason for her to. Not only that, Wolverine goes to basically open the refrigerator and another aspect of Davondra shows up. And this is one of the things that Jerry Dugan doesn't really explain. He doesn't really tell us if Davondra is more of like a hive mind concept, like we are all Davondra, all these different, spiders, kind of soul-eating entities that exist out there are all just Davondra as kind of like a hive mind existing in different aspects, or if there really is one Davondra out there and these are all just like fractions of itself. We're not really given an explanation to that. But Wolverine kind of faces off against these things and then basically seems to get eaten. And then you have Emma Frost, who takes the Power Stone, and she alongside Loki basically leave. Now, at this point, we switch over to Gamora. Now, where everything that goes on, that at least that we've talked about so far, takes place in Soul World, where Gamora is in alternate universe. In this alternate reality, this is one that we talked about before, where this alternate universe version of Loki had basically managed to access or at least pick up Thor's hammer, and then is powered by all the Infinity Stones. The difference here seems to be like Gamora taking the hammer of Thor, which is interesting to see that she's worthy, but it's kind of fudging the numbers a bit. We know just from like Jonathan Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers that not every hammer of Thor in every universe is the same. We saw like a different universe where there was a version of Thor who was unworthy and the hammer was made for an unworthy Thor. So we've seen them like shift around and change around a little bit, but Gamora taking the hammer of Thor seems to give her the upper hand on this version of Loki, and in turn she goes and attacks him. And of course, she kills him in the process. Now in this alternate reality, in the previous video, we'd also talked about how we had Phyla-Vell and we had Moondragon. And I want to offer a little more of an explanation on these characters. So in Marvel Comics, originally, you had the original Captain Marvel of the Kree Empire, and he was popular for a time, but when his popularity started waning, Marvel killed him off in 1984 with his own self-titled Death Book, which was written by Jim Starlin. And so following that, there wasn't really a Captain Marvel for a few years. I mean, you had like Monica Rambeau who took up the mantle, and then after her, you had Genus Vell. And Genus Vell was okay. I mean, he wasn't really like that great of a Captain Marvel. It was Marvel's attempt to basically try to find a way to like replace the original Marvel, and for the most part, they didn't really seem to enjoy the character until you got to Phyla-Vell. And the way this played out was that in 2004, as part of Joe Quesada's grand scheme to rework Marvel Comics entirely, what they did is they had the fourth volume of the Marvel series that starred Genus Vell. He went nuts. And he was manipulated by cosmic entities and then like recreated reality. And in this new universe that was created, you essentially ended up having like the version of, Alicia, I think it was Alicia or Elysium, who originally created Genus Vell, who created another version called Phyla-Vell. And so, as a result of this, you kind of had two versions in the same universe. And then when everything was set back to normal, Phyla-Vell came with him. And that was basically Marvel's attempt to kind of back end a new Captain Marvel with the intention of killing off Genus Vell and having Phyla-Vell take up the mantle for herself. That was Marvel Comics' way of introducing a new version of the character going into Annihilation. The whole idea of Dan Abnett sort of consolidating the entire Marvel landscape, the entire Marvel cosmic landscape, which came with Annihilation. So that's why you had like a lot of those huge cosmic scopes that were going on with Annihilation, Annihilation Conquest, the restoration of the Nova Corps, then its entire decimation, and so on and so forth. That's why that story is so singularly important. But Phyla-Vell was very, 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 very popular. Really, she still is, depending on, at least in certain circles. Now, of course, Moondragon has a far more in-depth history than Phyla-Vell. Moondragon is Heather Douglas. She's the daughter of Drax the Destroyer, and it was believed that she was killed when Thanos showed up on Earth for the first time to kind of access the Cosmic Cube, and had killed Arthur Douglas, who was resurrected as Drax, for the purpose of killing Thanos. Heather was taken to Titan by the father of Thanos and then raised to be someone who could defeat him. She's one of the most powerful telepathic characters in Marvel Comics, but she died a long time ago. She died not really a long time. She died during the events of Annihilation Conquest, I'm pretty sure is when she was killed. But the fact remains that for her and Phyla-Vell, they were a romantic couple. Like they were together. They had a really strong romantic chemistry, which is one of the things you didn't see that often at Marvel at the time, and people really, really did enjoy it. But again, kind of enough expose about these two characters. What Jerry Dugan does is he actually plays it pretty smart because of the fact that the reality stone is missing from Phyla-Vell, you end up having like Gamora who kind of reads her mind with the intention of finding its location. And then in turn, like Moondragon sort of engages in like this telepathic battle. And the result is that Gamora learns the location of the reality stone, and then Moondragon's more or less overpowered. And then in an effort to try to destroy Gamora, Phyla-Vell jumps into the conflict, and ultimately, of course, Gamora comes out on top. And so that leads to both Moondragon and Phyla-Vell using the power at their disposal to basically kind of crack a fissure in the alternate reality, and then enter into Soul World. Now the question is, why does this matter? Because this is kind of a backdoor way for Jerry Dugan to bring these characters back, to basically say, okay, so like now they're in Soul World, so when quote unquote everything gets set back, they'll come with it. Presumably they'll come with it. But following this, it really turns into Emma Frost and Loki just traveling around and waking people up. So of course you had Kamala Khan, Miss Marvel, who was merged with Kang the Conqueror, kind of a time-traveling villain. The Incredible Hulk, who's merged with Ant-Man, so it's like a mini Hulk, which is kind of cool. He's like talking so much trash, and he's like 3 inches tall. But again, like you know, when they're split up, it's one of these things where like Infinity Warps was very, very short-lived. Now Loki's plan is to kind of create not really a new Infinity Watch, but to bring back individuals who are particularly suited to wield the Infinity Stones. Each one of them are going to wield an Infinity Stone. And that's one thing to bear in mind. The Infinity Stones aren't attuned, right? It's not like those individuals who are really, really strong telepaths are best suited for the Mind Stone. Those individuals who are like magic wielders are suited for the Reality Stone. It'd be cool if Marvel kind of lined them up that way, but that was never really the case. It was just kind of like, hey man, you get an Infinity Stone, you get to be part of the Infinity Watch. And it's like, hooray, you know, and that's really about it. But again, you have, you know, once they actually leave this sort of pocket dimension inside Soul World and then travel into Soul World proper, Adam Warlock's basically being like eaten by one of these giant spiders, and Scott Lang shrinks down, jumps inside the spider, grows to a gigantic size, and then frees Adam Warlock in the process. It's pretty fast paced. And so in response to this, Emma Frost's stance is, well, we need more people. Like we need more people to fight alongside us. And so she basically starts waking up or really contacting all these people in Infinity Warps, and then just kind of brings them all into the larger conflict. And we don't really know what the basis behind this is. We can largely assume she's forming an army, and then she's going to split them all and double their numbers, set them back to the way they were before, that kind of a thing. But again, it's very akin to House of M in that regard, waking characters up to who they truly are, separating them, so on and so forth. And so from there, you go to Gamora and Flawa, again, you know, the guy who was from Asgard, and basically like going into the Well of Creation. And when they get there, what we end up learning here is that from Gamora's perspective, this Davondra entity, this Davondra being, which it doesn't seem as though she created, will basically go through and consume all these souls inside of this dimension in Soul World. And when its hunger satiated, it'll basically spin a new universe. And so it's kind of strange here, and it doesn't really seem to make a whole lot of sense. It kind of seems like Jerry Dugan's just kind of telling a story for the sake of telling a story. But when this new universe is created, Gamora will in turn enter it and then take control of it and then create it according to her own whims and wants, which really kind of begs the question, why doesn't she just do that with the existing universe inside of Soul World? I have no idea. The story has to be told. I have no real clue here. Again, it may be one of these things where like Dugan's kind of going through, and then it'll like the final issue will be a kind of tell-all in terms of what all's going on here. But it's very confusing. It's very cloak and dagger. It's really kind of all over the place. And this one seems to be kind of just spinning its wheels. But again, you know, what we end up having is that with Davondra going through and just kind of consuming all these souls, again, like normal human beings inside this dimension in Soul World, with a lot of the superheroes basically making it out alive, we end up having like Gamora just kind of biding her time and just sort of waiting for Davondra to finish what she's doing, at which point the entire set of events is being watched by the Watchers. Now, we don't really know what this means. Again, there's a lot of unanswered questions in this story. We don't know if the Watchers being here is for the purpose of just watching things unfold. We don't know if they're actually going to act, because remember, when the Watchers appear in Marvel Comics, it's basically like a huge thing is about to happen. There's going to be like this huge paradigm shift, but we don't really know what all it means. Really, Uatu the Watcher's been dead since the events of Original Sin. So there's one here who actually looks exactly like Uatu, the one with the fire coming out of his head. He looks exactly like Uatu, which means this version may have come back, or it's just a whole different version of his character. We don't really know. A lot of unanswered questions. This seems like one of those stories that Marvel's writing for the sake of writing it, just to kind of like set everything back to rights. So it's kind of like, hey, so what if Infinity Gauntlet ended with like a reboot, more or less? Like, what if we did what we were supposed to do after the events of Secret Wars and actually reboot the universe? We don't know if that's the case. It's kind of strange in terms of how all this is happening. But again, you know, this is one of those stories where it's just kind of informational in the middle ground. Not a whole lot really happens, and just kind of setting the stage for things to come. But with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.